Please read the bill.
Senate Bill 496 by Senator Sher, an act relating to wild and scenic rivers.
Mr. President, members, this bill, which is co-authored in this House by Senators Alpert, Bowen, Chesbrough, and Johnston, next to MTBE, deals with probably the most high-profile environmental issue that we're going to have before us this session. Senate Bill 496 is a bill that's sponsored by the Nevada County Board of Supervisors and designates a 39-mile segment of the South Yuba River, which is totally within the Nevada County, as part of the state's Wild and Scenic River system. This river's spectacular scenery, public parks, and popular swimming holes, extensive trail system, historic sites, and whitewater rafting generates more than $20 million annually in recreation revenues to the local economy, and the Board of Supervisors of Nevada County want to protect that revenue by keeping this with probably the most beautiful and one of the few free-flowing rivers still in existence in Northern California. Within this 39-mile river segment, the bill simply would prevent the construction of any new dams or any new diversions that would adversely affect the river's free-flowing status. I want to emphasize that existing water rights, diversions, and dam facilities upstream and downstream will not be affected and are fully protected. This includes water entitlements and diversions operated by the Placer County Water Agency, which officially supports the bill. The bill has no legal effect and does not restrict use of private property, has no effect on existing mining, logging, hunting, or public access. Now, shortly you will hear from the opponents that this bill is premature until the completion of flood control studies by the Army Corps of Engineers. You will also hear the argument that the bill is premature until completion of the CalFed process. But with respect to those arguments, here are the facts. The Army Corps of Engineers has already completed a major study of flood control options for the Yuba watershed and has issued its findings in a report issued in April 1998. 1998. That study examined two projects on the South Yuba, the so-called Edwards Crossing and the Narrows Dam proposals, and the Corps of Engineers concluded that the Edwards project is technically infeasible and that the Narrows project is economically infeasible. The Corps made similar findings when it studied those projects back in 1990. Just 2 weeks ago, the Corps of Engineers wrote, and I quote, "Our studies identified two viable options that we could recommend at the present time. Both options involve modifying existing levees. The plan that was selected was the plan that was preferred by the non-federal sponsor, the State Reclamation Board. Based upon current estimates, the project will provide 1 in 300-year level of protection for the more populated areas of the basin and a 1 in 200-year level of protection for the more rural areas of the basin. You should note that this level of protection, compared to what Sacramento would obtain under the flood control legislation currently pending in Congress and sponsored by Congressman John Doolittle, is greater. Under the Doolittle proposal, 1 in 170-year protection is provided." Now, turning to the CalFed argument, CalFed has looked at possible sites for new water acquisitions. None of the 14 potential on-stream reservoir sites identified in the December 1998 CalFed report are located on the South Yuba or within the Yuba watershed. Nor has the Department of Water Resources found a need for any new on-stream water supply or flood control projects on the South Yuba. You have on your desk a glossy brochure about the flood of 1997 that Senator Leslie has circulated. That describes a serious flood in California in 1997, but you should know
1 minute, Senator
that this is not directly related to the South Yuba. The South Yuba is one of 3 forks of the Yuba River, which combine into the main Yuba, Maybe 20% of the flow is in this South Yuba portion we're trying to protect. Also, this flood was caused by the Feather River. So I don't want you to be misled to think that this flood was due to flooding on the South Yuba River. And as I said, the Corps of Engineers said the best way to deal with any potential flooding there is by raising the levees, and the other proposed dam projects are infeasible either technologically or economically. This stretch of the river is within Senator Leslie's district, and he opposes the bill. When the Nevada County Board of Supervisors asked him to carry the bill and he didn't want to do that, they came to me because I have carried legislation in this area before, and when I was chair of the Natural Resource Committee in the Assembly, we had jurisdiction over this subject matter. That's why they came to me. This is a treasure for all of the state of California. It's not simply a local matter. It's just like I represent a section of the coast that belongs to all the citizens of California. This is one of the last remaining free-flowing rivers in California. It deserves to be protected. In concluding, I want to point out that in addition to the Nevada County Supervisors, the bill is supported by the South Yuba River Citizens League, the California League of Conservation Voters, Sierra Club, CalTrou, Friends of the River, and numerous other local and statewide environmental groups, as well as a large percentage of the landowners along the stretch of the river, and there is no labor opposition to this bill. I would ask for your aye vote.
Senator Leslie, you have 3 minutes.
Well, I'm going to need more than that. Hopefully you'll be so kind as to allow me. Members, this was passed out, this flood of 97. I just ask that you open up a few pages and look at the devastation that was caused in my district in 1997. And I would ask you to put yourself in my shoes. What would you do if part of your district had to bear the brunt of this type of flooding and danger and death and destruction and loss of billions of dollars? Senator Sher mentioned that there's studies going on about how to resolve the various issues of water this year. One of them is the CalFed process. Think a minute. We have water needs in California, and we have water problems in California. Not enough water, yet sometimes and way too much at other times, causing flooding. CalFed has been working on this for quite some time now. And because of the CalFed process, the water wars have simmered down and stopped enough so that people can take an honest look at all of this. I'd submit to you that it makes absolutely no sense to designate a wild and scenic river in the middle of the CalFed process when this river is part of the integral decision making that has to be done through the CalFed process. Yuba County obviously has to deal with this flood problem. They are in the midst of an exhaustive study evaluating every single possible method of trying to deal with the excess water that comes through their area. It makes absolutely no sense to designate a wild and scenic river that would somehow limit the ability of Yuba County to complete their studies, to do the work, and to see if there might be some action that could be taken to try to control the dangerous flooding. I'm working on a committee with Senator Bowen and Senator Costa and others to study the divestiture of PG&E of the various properties throughout the 1st Senate District and other places in the state as well. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever to designate this as a wild and scenic river in the midst of our discussions on how we're going to deal with the PG&E issue. Now, I want you to be aware of something else that's at stake here. What's at stake is a federal designation which will eliminate California's control over this river. Let me just tell you very quickly how this works. State of California can designate a wild and scenic river, but if they do, then the federal government, by administrative action rather than by an action of Congress, can make this a federal wild and scenic river, taking away California's ability to make its own decisions relating to the water in this area. Now, let me just conclude by saying this. We have a process in law right now that states how we are to go about declaring a wild and scenic river. It's in the code. And what it says is, and I'll read it to you, this is right out of the Resources Code, section 5093.547. The legislature of California adopted this law, and it says if we're going to have another wild and scenic river, the Secretary of Resources shall study and submit to the governor and the legislature reports on the suitability or non-suitability of the river going into the system. A few years back, we designated a number of rivers as wild and scenic rivers. And at that time, we said, in the future, we are going to have a study. And each report shall include maps and illustrations, shall show, among other things, the area included within the report, the characteristics which do or do not make the area worthy of addition to the system. This law is being violated. Now, yeah, we have the authority to violate our own laws, but this law was put into the books, and would you want to guess who the author might have been? The author was Byron Sher. He's the one that said, this is what we do when we create a wild and scenic river. And now he has decided that he will come from the Bay Area into the foothills, and he will determine what the policy should be, and he will throw out his own law and the law that we all rely on to determine if a wild and scenic river should be put. I represent an area that's in trouble, and we need your help. And this is not help. For heaven's sakes, let's let the CalFed process, the PG&E divestiture, the Yuba County study, the Corps of Engineers study, the Forest Service study on what to do, take its course, and then we can decide how to deal with this river. Do not preclude the ability for Yuba County to deal with their problems. I ask for a no vote.
Senator Kelly.
Mr. President, members, I also rise in opposition to this measure. I've been asked by Senator Ortiz to set on a committee to study the flood control issues here in the Sacramento Valley, this region, and further north. And this issue on the Yuba River will be impacted by the studies that we're going to conduct with respects to the flooding that occurs in this region. If we have this particular sector of the river placed in a wild and scenic rivers designation by the state of California, the first and second step that is going to happen is the federal government will step in and take over the wild and scenic aspect of this river, and that precludes us from doing an awful lot of the study work that is currently taking place, and that study work which we will be involved in the committee that Senator Ortiz has asked us to sit on. So if we are precluded by this measure becoming statute from conducting these studies and moving forward because of placing this under the Wild and Scenic River Act and then the federal government stepping in and doing the same thing, then what is the purpose of trying to go forward and develop remedies for the problems that exist? And I know many of you have been around here when we've had flood problems in the winter. A couple of years ago, it was rather severe around here. The facts of life are just such. When you place this particular sector of the Yuba River under wild and scenic river status, you preempt these types of studies, and those studies by the Corps that are currently being conducted, you preempt that from taking place, and you have the federal government's ability to move in right away to do what they feel is proper for this particular aspect of the river. I ask for a no vote on this measure.
Senator Costa.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, members of the Senate. The protection of the South Yuba River is an appealing idea, and it's one that I think politically is popular. It's also an idea that I think warrants further discussion. Designating of the South Yuba River as a wild and scenic river, though, will preclude that discussion from happening. Back in the mid-1980s, I, with some of my other colleagues, dedicated a section of the Merced River from below Yosemite Valley down to the reservoir and the valley floor as a wild and scenic river. We did so because it's an important asset like the Yuba River is. But I think the distinction between our effort to designate that portion of the Merced River as wild and scenic and the effort to designate this river at this point in time is one word, and that is consensus. There was consensus throughout the area that it was important to save that segment of the Merced River for future generations to come. It's important that we value the issues and weigh them, as Senator Sher suggested. But I think we have to do it in the broader context. I'm not advocating that we consider putting a on-stream reservoir on this site. I think the evidence that was mentioned by Senator Sher in 1998 is meritorious. But the fact is that this river, this fork of the river, has, I think, significant impacts on the other river systems that regionally flow into the Sacramento River down to the capital of this state. As was stated, we remember what the floods were like in 1997 and what they were like in 1986. And let me tell you, as sure as we are all standing here this morning debating this issue, we will have floods again. Make no mistake about it. It is Mother Nature at work. It has been a fact of history of California even before the state was populated. And the difference is that we have, as I stated earlier, 33 million people living in California, and it's estimated that we're going to have 50 million people living in this state in another 30 years. You need to understand that it's out of that 17 million growth of population, 7 million out of those 17 million are estimated to be living in the next 30 years in the Great Central Valley between Redding in the north and Bakersfield in the south. The cost of trying to protect and preserve prime ag land, protect the health and safety of the lives of the people that will populate this area in the next 30 years has to be a consideration we take into account. And encouraging those local communities to make proper land use decisions so that we're not putting populated areas at risk for future flooding. And we are attempting to try to do that in separate bond measures. But I think, as the Sacramento Bee indicated in its own editorial, that when we look at the considerations of putting this into wild and scenic, and I believe at an appropriate time that may well come to pass, maybe sooner than I would prefer, but I think it ought to be done in conjunction with developing a regional solution. A regional solution should include the protection of the South Yuba as a natural resource. It should consider flood control protection for Marysville, Yuba City, and Sacramento. If nothing else, we ought to have a vested interest in where we work and where many of us live. And third, it should also consider the assurances of water supply reliability for those that depend upon the South Yuba for their water supply. Now, I know, as Senator Sher indicated, that this doesn't impact existing water rights, but it does take this out of the debate if we pass this and it's signed into law in considering the regional impacts and how we mitigate those regional impacts. I believe that Senator Sher's goals can be accomplished if we continue to work with those who have different opinions on a bill that will develop a solution that meets all of the points that I outlined. for those reasons, I can't support this bill at this time, even though I supported the efforts of putting the Merced River, that portion of it, into the Wild and Scenic River Act. So I think you need to be thoughtful, members, as we vote on this issue. I think the Sacramento Bee has stated well that this measure should be put on hold or tabled until such a regional solution can be developed, and for that reason I urge a no vote.
Senator Johannesson.
Thank you, Mr. President, members. You know, I find it interesting that they went to Senator Sher for carrying a piece of legislation. I would think it would have been rather obvious to Senator Sher that they have already tried to bring that to the representatives of that area and didn't find pay dirt. So they went to Sher. I think that you need to know that when the state was made that this was a general feeling of the public, there was a political correctness and all the rest of the stuff. They had great support in that area. I can tell you they do not. They do not. You may have 4 out of the 5 supervisors up in Nevada County be interested in doing that, but that's quite frankly perhaps interesting, a very selfish kind of a situation. The other thing that was stated was the $20 million for recreation, and I wanted to balance that with the hundreds of millions of dollars that were spent in the cleanup and the damage that was caused by this flooding. I was there. Were you people on those levees? Were you people there watching this happen? No, I think that this would be foolish to try this at this point. The other thing that I somewhat find interesting is that we're told, if I got the information correctly, we were told that, quite frankly, CalFed has already no interest in that area. Not true at all. I chair the Oversight Committee of the Senate CalFed, and I've been trying to keep an open mind for the total issue of water in the state of California, and this is very much in the area of that mix. The other thing we better be aware of is that one of the most dangerous areas that we're dealing with is the Sacramento City region, up in Thomas's and all the rest of it. Now, let's make absolutely sure that we do it right. And I think the designation of something like this will absolutely be ludicrous. And I'd like to quote, before I leave, I'd like to quote, this is from the opinion, the Sacramento Bee. The legislators should table this proposal until the Army Corps of Engineers and the Yuba County Water Agency provide more information on possible alternatives in studies that are already underway. Those who understand ability wish to maintain a wild and scenic upper Yuba should first help forward a viable downstream solution. When the floodwaters run wild in the valley, it isn't a very scenic kind of a thing. And for those of you that are very interested in protection of the endangered species, let me point something out to you. If you get tens of thousands of acres underwater in a valley, believe me, the famous giant garter snake is floating under the Golden Gate as a lifeless mass. Let's protect them all, but more than anything, let's protect the farmers, let's protect homes, let's protect lives, which, by the way, was lost. Let's not do anything until we know exactly what we're doing and when to do it. And please, look to the representatives in the areas that's being affected and get some advice from them. Perhaps they may even know something about what the people want in that area. Thank you. I urge a no vote.
Senator Hayden.
Mr. President, members, we heard this bill for several hours in Policy Committee, and it's a complicated bill because there's a background and a foreground. Most of the opposition is about the background. There's a cultural change going on in Nevada County, in the foothills. There's growth, there's development. Where will the water come from? What will happen if we turn down the possibility for a dam in California? The foreground was more interesting to me in the debate because you have a senator, Mr. Leslie, saying that this is going on in his district, and he's against it, so why should Mr. Sher bring it up? But on the other hand, there's the Nevada County Board of Supervisors, which has asked for this action. And when we, when we heard this in committee, there was a former defeated member of the Nevada County Board of Supervisors testifying against the bill as a community activist without acknowledging that the board itself, by a majority, had asked us for this designation of wild and scenic. So that issue of who's asking for it and are they representative is an important one. Some of the opponents are in denial or tried to minimalize or marginalize the fact that the County Board of Supervisors has asked for it. In addition, somewhat to my surprise, the local conservative newspaper has editorialized in favor of Mr. Sher's bill as well. And that may take some getting used to, but it's a sign of the times, it's a sign of change, when you have the Board of Supervisors and the newspaper in favor of a bill, it seems to me it deserves our legitimate consideration rather than questioning their authenticity. As for this issue of the feds, I am told that the East Carson and the West Walker legs of rivers were designated by the state 10 years ago or so, but are not in the federal system, and I think that Mr. Sher's amendment addresses that. Some of Mr. Costa's points, I think, are well taken, but I would read them as an argument to move the bill to the Assembly for consideration of amendments to take into account some of the regional impacts. So that's the bill. I went up there, matter of disclosure, and took a several-mile hike down to the bottom of the watershed to see what it would be like if it was all flooded by a dam. It's quite a fantastic place, and I was impressed by the fact that for 15 years, people have been trying to have this river designated wild and scenic. It's a tribute to local community activists that they have come this far. It would be not an override, it would be a tragedy to override their will, which is not only representative at the grassroots level, but at the Board of Supervisors and the newspapers. I'd ask for an aye vote. Some of the issues raised can be dealt with in the Assembly.
Senator Ortiz.
Members, there's been a lot of debate on this floor about all of the counties that would be affected by this decision we have to make here today. And I will tell you, this is probably one of those issues that is so close in the inability of science to clearly direct us that it's one that deserves serious consideration by all of us before we cast our votes. More importantly, as I have been reminded by many of my colleagues who are opposed to this in their analysis of my district, that it's a bad vote for me to support this. I will tell you that it is not a bad vote, and let me tell you why. Some of our heaviest floods in 1997, in which there was a major event in the Yuba River watershed, did not flood Sacramento. Additionally, there is a major study underway right now by the Army Corps of Engineers of the whole Sacramento-San Joaquin river systems, which will consider the effects of this tributary on our flood control system. And with all due respect of my colleagues who care about the Capitol, I ask them to carry that concern as I move forward again for a second time to determine whether we can get the basic dollars needed to reflect the fact that we have had a huge local contribution towards our levee systems without the state assistance that we deserve. This is a dilemma in which there are 3 or 4 counties that are affected, and it's a science that is imprecise. And unfortunately, and this is a statement to my local flood control agency that I look to for guidance and assistance, there is no clear statement from the SYRCL board. I will say, however, that much of the data that has been presented of the studies underway, the floods that we have endured in the region as a result of the Yuba River watershed do not suggest to me that we are increasing the risk of flooding in the Sacramento area. It is a close call. I ask each of you to seriously consider this, but weigh in favor of supporting this measure, and I support an aye vote on this bill.
Senator Johnston.
The legislature is seldom faced with the debate over a Wild and Scenic River designation because most of the rivers of California are committed as to their use, and most of them are not wild, and arguably many of them continue to be scenic. It's understandable why the local legislators representing their area would resist this legislation. But for the state of California, we need to have rivers that are wild, at least in part, as we need rivers that are dammed for the multiple uses that many rivers are. I ask for an aye vote.
Any further question or debate? Senator Chesbro.
Mr. President, members, I come from a district that has probably most of the state's remaining wild and scenic rivers. And at the time that those rivers were designated back in the 1970s, it was very controversial, and there was a lot of opposition in my district to it. But it was a long-term decision that was made by this legislature and this governor, and it's one that now receives widespread support. And I think disbelief that it ever could have been considered that we should have dammed those important scenic and environmental resources for this state. I believe Senator Sher has proposed this measure for the long term for the people of the state of California, and I urge your aye vote.
Senator Sher, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I think the bill has been obviously fully debated. I think most of the arguments in opposition were those that I tried to anticipate in my opening. I want to make it clear that the studies have already taken place. The Corps of Engineers has studied this twice and said that dams are not the way on the South Fork of the Yuba at this point to deal with flood issues, that they're technologically or economically infeasible at the two places that had been suggested. I want to emphasize that on the CalFed process, that already has been studied. Senator Johannesson was just wrong when he said that they're still considering on-stream reservoirs in this stretch of the Yuba River. The Department of Water Resources' latest update on the California Water Plan only identified 2 projects on the entire Yuba watershed as options. One was the Parkspur Reservoir on the main Yuba, which is 20 miles downstream from this stretch of the South Yuba, and the other one is an off-stream project called the Waldo Project, which is not even on the Yuba itself. So those studies already have taken place, and I just want to close by addressing 2 of what I think are kind of red herring arguments that were made. Will designation under the state's Wild and Scenic River automatically lead to designation under the federal system? You should know that designation under the federal system does put more constraints on the landowners than the state. That's why when I carried a bill previously on the West Walker and the East Carson, the preference of the landowners was for state designation. And state designation does not automatically lead to federal designation. And indeed, the first section of this bill points out that it's the intent of the legislature in enacting this act that it will accomplish the preservation of these values that we're trying to protect without the necessity of having this designated under the federal system. Finally, I want to just respond to Senator Leslie's argument about my earlier legislation. It is true, I carried legislation some time ago that provided for a permissive 2-step process. First, a study by the Secretary of Resources, and following that, the designation. But it was purely permissive. Senator Leslie or someone sought a legislative council opinion to indicate that this was mandatory. Our legislative council says it is not mandatory. You can go directly to the listing. That's what the supervisors in this area want us to do. They want it listed. That's what 70% of the landowners who were surveyed recently want to happen on their stretch of the Yuba River. This is something for the long-term members. This is a wonderful stretch of free-flowing river. There's not much left. Let's save this branch of the South Fork. Please vote aye.
Senator Leslie, for what purpose do you rise?
to make a correction of a misstatement that was just made.
Fine.
And this is important. There were many misstatements made by the supporters, but I'm not going to go back and correct all of them. But I do want to correct this one, because federal designation is very critical to this. We don't want federal designation. Now, Senator Sher says that's why we're going for state designation, because it'll avoid the federal designation. That is exactly the opposite of the facts. The fact is, once we get a state designation, the federal government can designate it administratively. Otherwise, it would take an act of Congress. And just to clarify the point, here's what the proponents of the bill say. John Reagan, SYRCL's Wild and Scenic campaign director, explained the group intends to get the South Yuba River into federal designation, but hopes state designation would allay fears about the threats to private property. In other words, let's sneak it through and then we'll go for federal designation. It goes on to say the bill's supporters hope it will lead to federal wild and scenic status for the river, which would stop various projects. So don't be misled by, I'm sure, an inadvertent error by Senator Sher. The intent of this is to get a state designation, then to get federal designation, and as Senator Sher accurately said, that will lead to additional land use restrictions by the federal government on part of the 1st Senate District.
All time has expired. Secretary, call the roll.
Alarcon. Aye. Alpert. Aye. Baca. Aye. Bowen. Aye. Brulte. No. Burton.
Aye.
Aye. Chesbro. Aye. Costa. No. Dunn. Aye. Scutia. Aye. Figueroa. Aye. Hayden. Aye. Haynes. Hughes. Aye. Joannesen. No. Ross Johnson. No. Johnston. Aye. Carnett. Aye. Kelly. No. Knight. No. Leslie. No. Lewis. No. McPherson. Monteith. No. Morrow. No. Mountjoy. No. Murray. Aye. O'Connell. Aye. Ortiz. Aye. Peace. Parada. Aye. Polanco. Pachigian. No. Rainey. No. Schiff. Aye. Sher. Aye. Solis. Aye. Spear. Aye. Vasconcelos. Wright. No.
Ayes 21, noes 14. The measure is agreed to.
Polanco, aye.
Ayes 22. Next, Senator Bowen, item 78.
Senate Bill 932 by Senator Bowen, an act relating to telecommunications.
Never did it right. Mr. President and members, one of the